Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Ross Board of Education work session. Today is October 20th, 2022. Mrs. Logan, could you please call the roll?
Mrs. Hayes? Mr. Kleinfelter is out. Mr. Schnell? Here. Mrs. Webb?
Here.
And Mr. Van Winkle.
Here. Okay, so for tonight's work session, for the people in the crowd, we're going to hit on two topics. The first topic is going to be the permanent improvement 10-year plan. And then the second topic is the financial update and levy conversation. So what we'll do, Dr. Kunkel, if you don't mind, we'll do the permanent improvement 10-year plan. If people have questions for that specific document, then we'll answer them then. Okay? Then we'll move on to the financial update and levy conversation. Same thing. So if you end up having questions, is there some documents there, Steve? Thanks. So we'll make sure that we leave plenty of time for people who have questions.
Yes.
For that. So the first thing got into public is the it says PI Fund 003. Dr. Kunkel, the floor is yours.
Yeah, before I turn this over to Mr. Castater or Mrs. Logan, let me just say that this is a working document. This is very fluid. We have a facility meeting that meets on a regular basis. A lot of these are placeholders, but I think it's a good start to a long-term plan. So just note that when you look at these numbers, they may or may not be accurate because we're projecting years out, but I think it's a good placeholder so we can plan for our district. So that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Castater or Mrs. Logan to get in the PI plan.
Yep. So we'll start kind of in the top corner there. And I think to reiterate what Dr. Kunkel said, as you can see, we're projecting out items here all the way through 2030. A good example, I think, that we'll talk about is on the expenditure side. We have a line for bus purchases. So we know this year we purchased 2 buses. As you can see on the yellow highlighted cell there under bus purchases, it's showing $197,210. That is the actual cost of 2 buses this year. Our placeholder number out several years is still $200,000. So that obviously could fluctuate over time, but we have to put some type of placeholder in there just to have the money allocated and budgeted for those type of things. The first cell I want to draw your attention to is in the upper left-hand corner under FY21, the one that's highlighted in orange. September receipt for property tax at $145,600. That was the last receipt that we had prior to moving the 2 inside mills. So I know we've talked about that quite a bit in October 2020. We moved 2 inside mills to increase the amount of money that was coming into our permanent improvement fund on an annual basis. So looking at that, you can see the side-by-side difference there. September fiscal year 21, the September receipt, $145,600 versus what was received in April of that year, $606,000, and then even moving over to fiscal year 22, the September receipt of $504,703. So previous to moving that inside millage, we were looking at approximately $350,000 a year to work with for all of permanent improvement district-wide. That does not allow us to get ahead of anything. We had to be very reactionary, couldn't be proactive with preventative maintenance or replacement cycles that we have the opportunity to do now. So if you look at the gray highlighted cell, fiscal year 23, this is where we're at now. Again, it is a working document. You can see some of the items that are in the line item for this year. Tried to color code it a little bit. The yellow meaning that it's still kind of in process. Those funds may be encumbered for this year, but we haven't fulfilled the order, or like in the case of the buses, we have yet to receive those 2 buses. So that's the green are items that we have paid. Things that have already come through, like the bell and intercom system at the high school and middle school, some peripheral technology, which would be like projectors that we were able to replace in some of the buildings this year. Then obviously the weight room renovation we did over the summer, and the bus lease payments we're finishing up prior to having enough revenue coming into PI to be able to purchase buses. We had a program of leasing a few buses for a couple years, so finishing up those lease payments there. So as you scroll down towards the bottom of that line, you can see moving out across time under the final ending balance, the PI fund has a relatively healthy balance moving out through fiscal 27, 28, 29. That's the goal, is to continue to have a healthy balance in there while accomplishing the needs of the district from a facility and improvement standpoint. The other orange cell I will call your attention to, we've talked about this before as well, under fiscal year 27, $1.8 million to replace the Ross High School roof. So I know sometimes we hear in the community, people still call this the quote-unquote new high school, but it is almost 15 years old at this point. The roof is going to need to be replaced relatively soon, and that is the actual dollar estimate that we've received from the contract, from a couple different contractors to replace that roof. So you can see at fiscal 27, that hits our bottom line a little bit on the PI side with the balance, but we do anticipate having some funds to carry over from 27 to 28. The other thing I would, if you look up at this, I know it's not on this screen, but there are some future considerations that we don't have built in the plan. That would be our track is in dire need of replacement. We did go to bid for a track this year. It came back extremely, extremely high. We chose to hold off and postpone renovating the track. We also have potential tennis court replacement coming down the pike. Our tennis courts are in bad shape as well. But those are two pretty high ticket items right now that we don't have built into the plan, but they are considerations that we know we need to accomplish at some point.
Any questions from board members?
Andy, do you have anything?
Guess I would just add on to what Steve said, and just that, again, these are projections.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean we're going to purchase a new roof in 2027. It means we think that's about the time we might need to. So
Right.
It's more for to be used as a planning tool. And this also kind of will hopefully prevent us from being in a situation where we were in 2018.
Yeah.
2018, when we had to take $1.6 million out of the general fund to cover the new air conditioners at the middle school in Elda, so that to make sure our PI fund is properly funded and budgeted out for those large purchases in the future.
Yeah, I think the buses are a great example of that as well. I mean, we have an allotment of money allocated over the next several years to buy replacement buses. That's a need because we weren't able to do it on a regular basis prior to having additional revenue in this fund. But if we're in a situation where we don't need to, then we can reallocate that money and do some different things with it. But again, having the additional revenue in this fund gives us the opportunity to have a plan, which we didn't have before, and instead of being very reactionary and just having to deal with emergency situations all the time, like the HVAC situation, and having to draw funds from the general fund to replace those units at Elda.
So I just want to be very clear. So the permanent improvement fund, you cannot take money out of that fund and transfer it to the general fund.
Correct.
That is illegal. You can't do it. Now,
Right.
you can take money from the general fund,
Right.
move it to permanent improvement fund. That's what we did in 2018-19 for the HVAC units. So this is not the reason why we're in a financial distress right now, but some people think we can take this money and move it. You can't do that. So just want to be clear on what this fund is set aside for.
It has to be used on anything that has a useful life of 5 years or more.
Right.
You can't
Right.
pay teacher salaries, you can't, no. And that's a good point.
Mrs. Hayes, do you have anything?
That's what I was
Yep.
going to mention. Did it better than I expected.
Mrs. Webb, do you have anything on this? Anybody from the crowd? Do you want to, if you have a question now regarding PI fund?
Well, I'm talking about buses. You were talking about buses.
Yep.
Does anyone check, Lakota went to fire out their buses? Are they having a fire sale on their buses?
I have no idea.
I didn't understand what the question was.
Penny, can you repeat that
the
question?
question?
Hold on, he's fixing it. I think he's fixing to
Are you saying they're selling off their buses?
We're not aware of that.
Yeah.
Am I right there that Lakota has hired out their busing?
I'm
I
not
have
sure.
no idea.
No idea.
Do you mean hired out their busing?
They're
or
not doing busing anymore. Somebody's doing it for them.
So I can speak to that. Lakota is one of those districts, like several others in the area, where they contract for their transportation services, and they contract with Peterman, who supplies the labor force to do their transportation. And so it's a contract service. It's not, the employees are not their own. It's a contract service.
So who owns the buses, Peterman or Lakota?
It's a combination.
Okay.
They lease some of their buses from Peterman, and they own some of their buses.
I was just hoping we could get some good deals on buses.
Anybody else have questions on PI fund? Do you want to grab the mic there?
So what year are we thinking about doing the tennis courts? I see a line item, but I don't see necessarily like a year where that's planned.
So Jason, those are conversations that we've had. We went to bid for track and tennis courts, and they came back way more than we expected. So at this point, there's no set time.
Right.
But I think that our tennis courts and track are in bad shape. So that's conversations that we need to continue to have, and there's no set year that we plan on doing that.
Is possibly even thinking about not replacing the tennis courts? And
Sure.
using other
Yeah.
kind of
Oh,
local
absolutely.
facilities rather
Yeah.
than
Right.
doing the replacement costs?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Those are all conversations we've had.
Yeah.
And then also other little line items that, just curious what they are. So there's like a fine arts fund, or not fund, line item, I should say.
Yeah, so Mr. Raymer, who oversees fine arts, did a needs assessment with K through 12, art, gym, music, all the departments, and there's some needs. So we allotted them $20,000 a year for 4 years to buy instruments.
I think the choir is going to buy risers
Right.
next year for the auditorium, new risers, things like that. So, yeah, based on his needs assessment, this was the amount of money that they requested over a 4-year period of time to replace some of those capital
Right.
items for fine arts.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. And then there's a $130,000 pole barn. What is, that's a really expensive pole barn.
So again, just a placeholder. We believe that, eventually we'd like to have all these little sheds that we have into one big pole barn that can have storage, could have athletic locker rooms. Again, that is just a placeholder. That's a conversation. But again, that's kind of the thought process of why that's there. I think we can move that. That, again, it's a very fluid document.
Jason, I think I'm with you on that. That's expensive pole barn, right?
very.
There's more to the barn than just
Sure.
the sides. Jake, do you want to,
Yeah.
Jake can hit on that a little bit.
So we've been exploring in my former role as
Yeah.
in my former role as the athletic director, we explored various concepts around an indoor facility of some sort to allow for accommodating a lot of the youth sports that we have in our community, a lot of the youth organizations we have in our community that would typically use a gym space. And since we have so much usage from the community that we allow them to use the gym, some of our own interscholastic programs were getting pushed out of that space, or we were fighting over the space. And so this has been a 5-6 year process, getting to the point where we've really honed in on an indoor facility that would not only accomplish the storage needs that we have. If you've been around the campus, you know that there are little sheds and barns and of all different condition all over the place to store some very valuable equipment, but also to allow to accommodate some of the indoor training space that we would need, for interscholastic athletics.
Sorry, I just have a lot of questions. So you have technology infrastructure upgrades where there's nothing forecasted out. I mean, typically, from what I've seen in business, you try to have roughly a 4 or 5 year rotation of technology. Having some type of, it would be more realistic budget if you have something placed there. So for example, recently we replaced 73 projectors. You could have those projectors on more of a rotating cycle, right? Where you wouldn't have to invest in so many projectors all in one particular year, as an example. And then finally, it's awesome that we have an emergency contingency, but I recall the air conditioners, right, with the you just mentioned the 2.6 million or 2.1 million, I forget the exact.
1.6.
1.6, sorry about that. Oh, the 1.6 million, and then I believe the chillers broke at one of the schools.
This one, correct, yes.
And then, and it's great that we have some roofing stuff as well, but, I mean, $50,000 doesn't even remotely approach those type of numbers. Having more of a higher, I mean, it looks like the ending balance is nice, but kind of really earmarking more money for those emergency repairs, I would challenge that we should increase that amount.
Sure, again, Jason, that's a placeholder,
Okay,
yes.
all right, great, thank you.
And then before we move on to the next part, just so people understand, when we do a barn or a track or whatever, tennis court, something, a big ticket, could you please explain the process that a public school has to go through?
Yeah, so we would go to a competitive bid.
Yeah.
Where we have contractors come out and they would scope the project. We would have a sealed bid process and obviously go through that with open bids, take the lowest bid, et cetera. But there's also something called state term pricing. So there's companies out there that are hired by the Educational Purchasing Council. And so those are the two options that we would go through. But yes, there's a formal process to go to bid.
Any other questions on the PI fund? Mr. Bossy?
Just help me with my memory here a little bit. We had a $1 million+ loan to do the middle school, intermediate school. Where is the payment coming to pay off that loan?
So remember, that loan was K through 12. It impacted lighting, K-12. It impacted HVAC controllers, new windows at the intermediate building, new boiler system. So it just wasn't for one building, it was more K-12. So if you see that, that's at the top of this document under FY22, that's the 1.6 million.
Right.
The payments are coming from the general fund, and every year we do a not needs assessment, but an analysis of the energy bills, and it's written into the contract that the savings that we have each month with utilities would offset the cost of the loan payment. So that was one of the reasons why we went with this loan at like 0.25%. But it does come out of the general fund, but again, guaranteed that the utility bills will offset the cost of what we pay. Does that make sense?
Yeah, when is the audit going to be done on that
You know,
annual audit?
Steve, it's
Yeah,
every
we should
year.
have it back this fall. They guarantee it in the fall, and this would obviously be the first year. We have not seen that back from Vista yet.
Right,
We should be getting that soon.
because if you don't have the savings, you still got to pay the bill. And that's where I just didn't understand where that's
Well,
going to show
it's
up
guaranteed that.
in the
our-
financial plan.
Yeah, yeah.
So if that payment's coming from the general fund, it would show up in the 5-year forecast and not
Correct.
in here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And, yeah, I'm sorry, one last question for me. So for special education, like investments in, additional curriculum for special education, there's specifically to dyslexia type of curriculum, and is there any way to pay for those type of curriculum out of the permanent improvement fund, or is that more of a general fund expenditure?
curriculum.
Jake, can you answer that? I didn't really understand what he was saying. Could you?
Yeah, so are you referring to the new dyslexia legislation coming out? Yeah.
I don't see it.
There's new legislation coming out where I believe, is it all first graders or second graders have to be tested for dyslexia, right? And so there's going to be an increased
No.
cost for that. And I was just wondering if we can pay for some of that added expense out of a permanent improvement fund by investing in curriculum and other services like that? Or does that have to come from a general fund line item?
So the Permanent Improvement Fund can only pay for anything that has a useful life of 5 years or more. So if there would be something associated with that, some sort of equipment that we would have to buy that had a useful life of 5 years or more, that could be paid for out of here. Textbooks technically could be paid from a PI fund, but most school districts do not do that because of all of these other items that you see here. There's usually not enough money left to do that, but supplies would not be able to come out of here. But if there was a piece of equipment that we had to do because of that, it could possibly.
So regarding the dyslexia laws, it's a bit misleading because it's much more sweeping legislation in terms of the focus on phonics at the K-3 level. And the great thing, well, I'm going to backtrack a little bit. So ODE has been very slow with details about this legislation. The professional development right now is free of charge through the ODE. So we have teachers actually training in that system. They've started already. They're going to continue that through the rest of the school year. But there are grants available. There's funding available that we are currently sifting through how to, like every other school district in the free world. I mean, we're all in the same boat in Ohio, trying to figure out how we move forward with this new change.
And last thing, thank you guys very much. This is exactly what I believe a lot of members in the community have been asking for. I know this level of detail is so much better. Having the plan, seeing the plan, it's very much appreciated. So thank you.
And just to address your earlier question, I personally am in favor, now that we've got some funding in this fund, if we can pay it out of the PI fund, we should be, so that without affecting those big ticket items down the road that are needed, but so that we can make sure we're not exacerbating the problem in the general fund.
Right. Yep.
And this thing will probably change tomorrow. It's so fluid. It is a good start, though. Okay, we'll move on to, again, same process. If you have questions after, I think Mrs. Logan and Steve, Jenny and Steve go through this, just kind of save them to the end if you don't mind. Is that how you want to handle it?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so
yours.
tonight we're going to go through an update, which is really going to focus on the levy request in a few weeks. So tonight, the goals of this update is really to review where are we now, what is financially, what is our situation, and I'm terming it as a crisis because from my experience, what this district is looking at, it is a financial crisis ahead of you. Then we're going to look at what is the financial status if the November levy is successful. And then, if it's not successful, let's look at some options and answer some questions. So the first question that I'm going to pose is, can the district continue to ask for 7.99 mils in the next calendar year, 2023, without any further reductions? Number two, if not, what would be the necessary millage in calendar year 23 to maintain our current operations. Number 3, if we wanted to keep the 7.99 millage in calendar year 2023, then what would we need to cut in order to maintain that 7.99 mils? And then 4th, the worst question, if we had to cut our way out of this, what does that look like? And then I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Conkle, who's going to talk about if we need to look at reductions, what those next round options would be that we would be focusing on. So we've talked about this. You know, these numbers, the information I'm going to share tonight is based on a draft 5-year forecast that we are working on currently. I will say, though, I do not believe there's going to be any material changes between now and what's presented in November, but I still want to state that because, you know, numbers, once they're printed, they're going to change probably somewhat before the November board member, but it's not going to be anything material. So currently, what is our situation? We have a levy on in November. That's our final levy opportunity for calendar year 2022. And why do I keep saying calendar year? Because when you put something on the ballot, it is based on the calendar year, and then you start collections the following calendar year. So for example, if you would have passed in August, it's the same timing when you collect on that. It would not be until after January of 2023. Same way with November. Next year's cash balance for this district is less than 15 true days cash. The benchmark is 30. That's the minimum. And the forecast that we're looking at is half that. And we're predicted to run out of cash in year 3 of the forecast, fiscal year 2025. And we will return to precautionary status if the levy fails, which we talked about, I think, a month ago. So this is just a snapshot showing what's our beginning cash for all of these fiscal years, total revenue, total expenditures, whether we're in a spending surplus or deficit. Reds are deficits. Reds are never good with finance. What would be the ending cash, encumbrances, and then that unreserved cash balance. I've also added true days of cash there, and you're going to see next year we're predicting 11 days of cash at the end of that fiscal year. And then for people who like graphs, I like graphs, but I don't like this one because it's showing in 2027 the situation continues to get worse, and in the 5th year of the forecast, you'd be underwater by $13 million. So what is the November 8th levy request? 7.99 mils. It's a 5-year emergency, which means that we would collect from 2023 to 2027. It would generate $3.75 million annually. And at the end of that 5th year in 2027, we would meet a 30-day minimum standard.
I have no idea.
So in 2027, if you go all the way forward to 2027 and you come down to that true days cash, you'll see that 39. So that's the figure that I'm talking about. And the dollar amount, that target that we'd be looking at as an unreserved cash balance would be at least $3 million. So your November levy would last 5 years. You would have at least 30 days of cash at the end of that 5th year. So it does what you need it to do. That's the good news. And again, here's a graph. Option to consider and questions to answer if it fails. So remember I said we collect the year after it's approved. So these are just a couple of charts. So if it passes this November, we would start collecting, and I've got it in green, in 2023, and we would stop in 2028. Your first fiscal year, you collect about half of that levy, and then you start collecting the full year after that. If you don't pass anything until calendar year 23, then your first collection would not be until fiscal year 2024, and again, it would be half. So that delay really impacts things. So again, this scenario is no reductions, we maintain the 7.99 mils. Does that work? And I will say, no, because if you kept 7.99 mils in the following calendar year, 2023, you only have 1 day of true cash in year 4, and you're underwater again in year 5. So it would not last 5 years. And here's the picture of that. The other thing I want to point out is the one that we're looking at for November goes through FY27. This one goes through FY28 because 5 years now goes out to 28. And you'll see there, 2027, 1 day of cash. It's actually less than that. It's 0.7. And then 2028, you're underwater again. So if we wanted to maintain current operations again and not make cuts, what would the estimated millage need to be in 2023? This scenario, if we keep everything the same, 30 days cash at the end of that 5th year, you would be looking at a 10.9 mil levy in 2023 to last 5 years with no reductions. And here's what that looks like. So you see in 2028, we're estimating 32 days of cash in that year, and it would last, that would be the 5th year. If we wanted to maintain the 7.99 mils and make reductions in order to maintain that millage, what would we be looking at? In order to maintain a 7.99 mil levy for calendar year 2023, you would be looking at a 7.99 mil levy and $1.2 million in reductions beginning in fiscal year 24 next year, and those reductions would not come back. They would not be reinstated. So once they're gone in order to make it last. And again, here's that $1.2 million coming out of your expenditures, the 7.99 mil levy coming on, and in 2028, again, there's that true days of cash, the $3 million in that 5th year, 2028. If we had to cut our way out of this crisis, what would that look like? $4 million of additional reductions beginning next year. And just like I said for the previous scenario, those $4 million would not come back. But that's not the worst part. What I'm going to show you too is beginning in 2028, we would be getting back into that same cycle, and we would have to start looking at additional reductions. In 2028, so the $4 million of reductions is included in here, no additional revenue. And you can see in 2028, we're back down to 1 day of cash. So, the 4 questions that were posed: can the district continue to ask for 7.99 mils in calendar year 23 without any further reductions? No, it's not an option. That levy would only last definitely 3 years, possibly 4, but not 5. What would the necessary millage be in calendar year 23 to maintain current operations? What we're looking at is a levy that would exceed 10 mils. If we wanted to keep 7.99 mils in calendar year '23, what would we need to reduce? 1.2 million in cuts beginning next year, and those reductions would not come back. And number 4, if we had to cut our way out of the financial crisis, what would that look like? $4 million next year. So I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Conkle.
Yeah, Mrs. Logan, thank you for that. Very thorough, and I think you explained that very, very well. Let me say, as a superintendent of this district, these are very, very challenging times. We have these discussions daily as a senior leadership team and also with our admin, but, we made $1.8 million in reductions and cuts the past 2.5 years. If we have to go further into cut mode, our education will look differently. We're getting into the fabric of why we're here. Education will just be differently. We are very thin as a district. We don't have a lot of layers of fat that a lot of these districts do. We just don't. We're very, very thin. So the 3 areas that we're going to discuss, we are just in the exploratory stage. There's no decisions that are made, but please understand the next level of cuts, if the levy does not pass in November, will devastate this school district. I can't say that any more clearly. Education will look differently. And we'll have the presentation on the website tomorrow. We'll have a press release that will go out to summarize all this to the public. So I just want to make sure that I'm crystal clear that 1, we're in an exploratory stage, but 2, the next level of cuts will change the way Ross students are educated. So first of all, transportation. We're going to take a deep dive in the next couple months to look at transportation. Do we go to a state minimum service, which would mean you do not bus students in the 2-mile radius, grades K through 8. Busing grades 9 through 12 could go away. So those are state minimum standards for transportation. So we're going to explore no busing 9-12. K through 8 would be on a 2-mile radius. Currently, we pick everybody up. Is that correct? Every student we pick up within that 2-mile radius. We're also going to look at shuttle stops. We had those in the past where a bus goes to a spot and students would obviously go to that shuttle stop. And then lastly, we're going to have to look at AB stops, AB routes, double routes. So those are conversations that we've had, we'll continue to have, but this will take us some time to dig into. The second item that I think we need to explore are our K through 8 specials, art, gym, music. Again, digging into academics, if we make cuts at the special level, art, gym, music, it will change the way we deliver instruction. And then lastly, we're going to look at the block scheduling for the high school. We've had the block schedule since 1999, which has been a long time. Block scheduling is something that we were accustomed to, and it gives us great results, but it's also very costly. So we're going to examine, we're do a deep dive and do a full analysis of our block scheduling. Students, again, at the high school level, it's going to look totally different. From a block schedule potentially to a 7-bell day, it could impact College Credit Plus, it could impact advanced classes, it could impact the number of classes that students take. So again, all 3 of these, there's not one good thing about them. Steve, you want to talk any more about the block scheduling?
I think you did a good job explaining it. The other thing I would say under number 2 with the elementary specials is that we still have to work within the constraints of a contract as well. So that would could alter the start and end times of the school day as well, in order to be able to stay within our contracted day.
Good point. That's all we have.
we'll go around the table if the board has any questions. I'll go first. Just to be clear, these three things are going to be explored over the next few months. If the levy fails in November, these three things aren't going to go into effect, just to make sure people understand that.
Correct.
You're going to explore these financially, each of these three things, just to see what it does, if there is cost savings or not. So
Correct, yes.
that's the main thing I want people to know, that you're going to explore these things, see what the actual cost is, if there's savings, if there's not, if it's worth doing, not doing, for that. Just on the mills, just recently, there was and I don't know who can answer this, but in the Enquirer, there's a lot of schools in Southwest Ohio that are going through what we're going through. I think there's 12 or so that's on the ballot in November. And a mill in Ross compared to a mill, and the one that caught my eye was King's. So, Steve, I mentioned something to you about it, and I off the top of my head, I can't remember exactly, but King's is going for, do you remember what their ask is?
See if I can find it.
So a mill would.
So my point is this, like, we're asking for 7.99 mills to bring in 3.72 million, correct?
So the way that it works
Yeah.
is it's all based on your assessed valuation of your community. So the
Correct.
value of Ross's community, our total valuation, 1 mil for Ross equals about $470,000. And so that's
It's the valuation of the community,
the
right?
total community, which is about 470 million.
Right,
So then, when you divide that all up, because 1 mil is $1 for every 1,000 assessed value.
Right.
So when you do the division, you come back to the $470,000 for 1 mil for us.
gotcha.
Right.
And the commercial property comes
That's
into,
everything.
comes into play.
All in.
Yeah, and that's the
Go ahead,
difference.
Steve.
I found the article, we were looking at it. King's is asking for 6.4 mils, which is 1.5 mils less, obviously, than we are asking for. But that 6.4 in their district generates $7.5 million a year.
Right. A lot of it's just commercial property
Right.
that they might have in their district.
Kings Island's helping them.
Do what? And
King
plus home
Island, yeah.
values and everything else, yeah. And then just the other thing, in looking at that article, and I don't want to call other districts out, but we're asking for a 5-year emergency
Right.
levy that's going to last 5 years. It's not going to be permanent. I did see some districts are asking for a permanent. So this would be a 5-year emergency levy that will be reassessed after 5 years. Just want to make sure we're clear on that as well.
Yes, good point.
Andy, did you have any questions on the
No questions,
Presentation?
but
or
just
comments?
would like to comment a little bit too as well. A, this is not an exhaustive list. And B, once these are assessed, we're going to have to, as a board and with our administration, and make the assessment as to what should be cut versus where should we rely instead on raising the millage ask for next year. So, Ms. Logan presented up to 10.9. So more than likely, if we fail in November, we're going to be a number, the ask is going to be somewhere between 7.99 and the 10.9 number based on the cuts that we have. But most importantly, if we cut it, it's permanent, because that ask that we come back for next year is going to take that cut into effect. It's not just let's cut it till we get this passed and bring it back. Other words, we're going to have to just turn around and ask for more as well, so.
Mrs. Hayes? To elaborate a little bit on what Andy said, a lot of the stuff that we've said, that this could be the cheapest, if you want to look at it, that it could be for the community. And just looking at the cuts, I would be shocked if you guys are able to come up with 1.2 million of permanent cuts. that would allow us to stay at 7.9. If you do, it's going to really change the district.
Sure, and again, just to be clear, the next level of cuts our education system will look differently.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't be any more clear about that.
Right. Mrs. Webb?
Not necessarily a question, but
Hold on.
my microphone, oh, there
There
we
you
go. But it might be important to note too that given our financial situation, that the state of Ohio is willing to do a performance assessment on the district. So we have another set of eyes to look at where we are and to make recommendations to the district. So, I mean, good, bad, and the ugly with what they're doing. So just kind of, but that's going to take at least probably 6 months.
Yeah,
Jenny?
we believe that it would not be completed until April or May, which would be too late if we needed to look at the next levy request, but it's still very valuable information. And it is nice to know that the state would do that for free, considering our financial situation.
And before we open it up the floor, Dr. Kunkel, this presentation that Jenny had, is that going to be emailed to every parent
Yeah.
through Final Forms?
Yep, and then we also have a levy statement and
The
also.
levy statement,
be on
and
our
also a website,
Yes.
and also social media
Media.
Yes.
pages as well, just so, because I know we
Correct.
don't have copies of it tonight. I just want to make sure people know they'll get copies tomorrow.
Pictures.
Yes.
Thank you so much. With that being said, we'll, Jake, if you don't mind being the man with the microphone.
It's a good job from Mr. Hay.
Mr. Schubert has a couple questions.
No, not this one. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I think they,
Jason, before you start,
Yeah.
I think a couple there's some students that are coming in for public participation, or even public members. Where's the sheets,
Right here.
Steve?
yeah, but they're back by the door.
They're in the back, so if you guys, just make sure you grab those sheets. Oh, they've already been given them to you?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll give it
Thanks.
to you.
Yep, okay. Mr. Schubert, go ahead.
So real quick, actually, Amy, so the state, so they are for sure going to come in and do another set of eyes. So they are, that's great, right? Having another set of eyes to possibly identify any additional cuts is, I view that as a good thing, for sure. And then these 3 possible cuts, are we thinking that's the priority for those cuts? Or is this just a list of items?
That's just a list of items. Yep.
We're going to look at every item
Okay.
to make cuts. Those are just the 3 that stand out.
And I understand like the 1.2 million is a huge number to get to, totally get that. But is there like any type of process for the staff or for the community to, suggest, possible ways of saving money? As an example, the report cards are mailed as well as emailed. That has to cost the district several $1,000s to mail those report cards out. If the parent has opted to get it via email, could we, possibly not send report cards via, the mail, physical mail? And I know that, that's something to look into. Granted, is that going to get you the $1.2 million? No. But it would save you, several $1,000s. Every little bit of stuff like that helps. So, your staff who are actively in the trenches, is there any process to kind of float up those type of ideas, that ways of saving money?
So staff always, they can always talk to their school administrator, school principal, and have those conversations. I think the work session for community members, and always Steve, Jen, and I are available to talk to any community member about school finance and suggestions. So we've been very transparent and open the past 12 months, and we'll continue that. So again, we don't have all the answers, but
Right.
we got to fix this problem.
Yeah, I mean, even just a simple email to all the staff saying, just reminding them that, hey, if you see something like this,
Right.
that we could save even just a little bit of money, every little bit helps to get to
Absolutely.
that 1.2 million, right? as well as it demonstrates to the community that, you know, we're trying our best to save as much as possible of the taxpayer funds, right? Real quick question for the treasurer. Why is, if we approve the levy in 2022, or really any year that we approve the levy, why are we only getting half of the money of that levy the following year?
Okay, so I'm going to go back to the slide if I can find it. I had too many slides. Okay, here's the slide, and I know this is small, but you pay your taxes. How do you pay your taxes? You get your tax bills when? Does anybody know? Like February and August, okay? So you pay your taxes twice a year. Our fiscal year starts July, so July 1 through June 30th. So if we passed a levy in November, the first time that we would see that collection is going to be in that February tax settlement in 2023. Okay? So we would get that first tax settlement, and the reason why you see March is because that's when the money would come to us. You pay that tax bill, and people pay, we get about 52% of our total taxes due to us in that first tax settlement. So we'd get 52% of the total at that March settlement, and then remember, it's calendar year. So then in August and September of 2023, we would get the second half, but we're already in our next fiscal year, which started in July.
Okay.
So our fiscal year, the back half of our fiscal year is the first half of the calendar year. So we only get to take advantage of one tax settlement that first fiscal year. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, thank you.
It's complicated, but it's all about tax collections.
Yep, get it.
I have another point on Ms. Logan. Can you explain when, like Amy brought up the state looking at it, but it's not, I just want to make it clear that it's not the state coming in and saying, you're cutting X, Y, Z, what we're getting in the spring. It's just a look at suggestions. That doesn't mean that the state's saying, like, you're cutting transportation, you're cutting fine arts. It's looking at cost analysis, and that then as a board and the leadership can
Correct.
review it.
It's an exhaustive, detailed approach that they do around the state. It's called a performance audit. And they are not necessarily looking at, and I think, Chad, you used quantity
over
versus quality.
Right, right.
So, you know, they're not going to care, I don't want to say care. Their recommendations are not going to be based on the quality of the educational program that we are delivering here at Ross. It is only going to be based on how much can you save if you make these changes. And so it's things for this board to consider. It's not anything that is going to be mandatory. It is suggestions and recommendations, and they will do a lot of the work for us. If we want to take a look at something, instead of us spending our time digging in, they will do that for us, and it's free to the district.
Let me just give one example on the quantity over quality. For example, they might come in here and say, we need to cut, I'm making this up, 3 bus routes. Well, those 3 bus routes, a student now might be on the bus an hour and 15 minutes. So they're looking strictly at quantity instead of quality. So when we get the report back in April, May, we're going to have to really have a deep dive into, you know, that quantity versus quality. But those are things that we're going to have to discuss more.
And I believe it's mostly about what the average district is in the state or the area, right? It's compared to other schools of similar size or that they consider our peers. This is about what we should, a benchmark number that we should strive for, correct?
And Talawanda did this in 2020, I believe, so that's kind of a good document to look at.
Just one more. So those three cuts, those are, pretty extreme, pretty potential hard-hitting cuts, right? Have we considered, I think I saw a stat that the number of kids forecasted are actually going down, especially since the Burns Farm development hasn't proceeded as originally planned. I mean, should one of the possible big cuts be reconsidering needing the intermediate school? I know that we have a bill that we're paying a permanent improvement fund, but I mean, there is a decent amount of funds to operate that additional school. If the number of kids are going down, should we consider not utilizing that anymore as one of the
Jason,
possible options?
We'll look at all options, but the intermediate building is not why we're in this financial crisis. Most of those funds were taken out of the permanent improvement account, which was around $3 million. We believe that the cost benefit of that intermediate building outweighs, what we had to take from the general fund. So that's a thriving building. They're excelling test-wise, academically, socially, emotionally. But again, we'll consider all options. I just don't see that being realistic in closing that building.
Well, in my personal opinion, cutting things like music and physical education and art is those type of programs are more important than having an additional building, especially if the number of students are going down. If we're looking to save or find $1.2 million worth of operating costs or general fund type of costs, that seems like to me the decent place to look is reducing a building and the number of people working, obviously extra personnel and utilities and everything else, right, for that building. So that's a good place to look at, and I would rather see that done than music, art, and physical education being cut.
Thank you for your comments.
Yep, thanks, and that's it.
We have one in the back, if you don't mind taking it back here, Jake.
Thank you, sir. I apologize I'm going to ask a couple of questions in order to just try to understand things a little bit. Can you remind me the total budget of the school district? Is that roughly 25, 26 million?
28 or
Going to
29.
go back to one of the slides.
I apologize for coming in
No,
late.
it's okay. So this slide will show you, you can see the total revenues and total expenditures predicted for 2023 is right at 29.5 million.
Great, thank you for that. And can you also remind me that personnel cost roughly makes up, is it roughly 83, 84%?
I know it's about 80%, but I don't have the exact figure percentage.
That's fine. So I'm just trying to understand, when I just do some quick math, let's say that leaves approximately 5.3 million left in the budget once you take away all the personnel cost. Quick math on that. So I just to make sure I understand that the only way we're going to cut, let's say, 4 million or 3 or whatever, $3-4 million is basically shut down every building, never buy any materials, never do anything, or you've got to cut several $1 million in staff. Is that a fair comment?
I will say to get $4 million in reductions, you can't say you're not going to touch your personnel line item, because that, to your point, that is where the majority of the expenditures are. And so if you're looking at cuts that deep, you're going to have to look at that line item. Yes.
Yeah, just to be clear, I agree with you. I guess I'm just trying to help understand the point for others as well, that when you're talking about $4+ million,
It's people.
it's people.
people.
And so I know there's a lot of people that feel like we don't pay enough, we don't do enough. There's really nothing else we can do. It's really a matter of jobs at this point, moving forward. All right, thank you.
Fair assessment. We have a We can go over if we need to, but we have a couple more minutes.
I'm going to make this real quick. During the levy, I have wondered why athletics cost has not played into what we're doing with the levy. I mean, we talk about we still need a track, we still need this, we still need that, and then you're going to put first graders walking 2 miles to school while you drive athletics buses to games? I mean, I don't understand why athletics have not played a part in this entire levy situation.
Remember, though, right now, the cost for athletics transportation is being covered by the fees that the students are paying to be in the program. So all of the athletic supplementals, coaches' salaries, and the transportation cost is being covered by the fees. So the school district's operating budget is not paying for that. The fees are covering the cost of transportation.
But again, I'm also going to reiterate what Dr. Kunkel said. We're looking at everything.
Yeah.
I mean, there is nothing that we're not considering. Just because those were the 3 items that were on that list, I mean, you said it, this is not an exhaustive list. These are the main 3 things that we believe that make sense to look at, but we're looking at everything.
Okay, we'll do
I just had a quick question.
one more oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. One more question, go ahead.
So point number, I think it was 2, talking about specials, K to 8, I believe it was, impacting start and end time of the school day. And then the block schedule impacting 9 to 12, bell schedule, all of that. So in my mind, I'm thinking, what's the minimum the state requires in each of those? I should know this, but I don't. So school, like, what are the hours required for a K to 8 student? What are the hours required for a high school student? Because if my memory serves me, in high school, they have plenty of time, so what does that look like?
So elementary-wise, in middle school, it's lower than what we are now. I wanted to say 5, is that right, Jake? 5.5 hours? It's definitely lower than what we're, in session now. So we're going to have to take a dive into that. What without, if we eliminate or art, gym, music, that could change the starting time because teachers by contract have to have their 30-minute plan bell. So that could be the first thing in the morning, which kind of shrinks the day for students. Again, we got to analyze all of that.
And we also still have half-day kindergarten we have to consider,
Good point,
and
yes.
they barely meet the minimum hours for kindergartners. I think every year we're looking at maybe 2 to 3 calamity days total before they would have to start making time up or doing blizzard bags or something of that nature, because they're very close to the minimum hours.
Yeah, kindergarten, we are razor thin on that margin. 172 student days gives us just over the 455 hours that are required for kindergarten. So we were razor thin at that. And then as you go up through the ranks, it's varying in terms of how many quote unquote days, although it's hours now, that we are over that minimum.
Okay, we'll take a brief break at 7:03. We'll start our regular meeting at 7:05. 2-minute break.